Ooh.
So welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us. My name is Sharon Callis and I am the lead artist and executive director for Earth Hand Gleaners Society. We are located here in what is known as downtown Eastside Vancouver, the area that is officially and originally known as, oh, I've just totally lost it. My brain has just dropped it. The giant place of the giant maples. And we are on the unceded, stolen, traditional territory of the Musqueam, the Tsleil-Waututh, and the Squamish people, which is where we primarily work out of in the work that we're doing with Earth Hand and the parks that we manage. I'm thrilled to have Kathy back for this talk tonight. Kathy Dunster, Dr. Kathy Dunster, is the urban ecosystem professor at Kwantlen Polytechnic University, and Kathy's been growing flax for linen for a number of years now, having originally joined us for our Flax to Linen Grow Along Club back in, I think, 2016. And that really got Kathy going on what seed varieties there might be out there. Kathy and I were able to choose some seeds from the seed bank, Canadian Seed Bank, for her to be growing. And that original list of, I think, 18 varieties, we have now brought down to about 8. I say we, it's Kathy that has done that work. And Kathy's going to be talking about that and showing us some of the results, where things are going at this point leading forward. So I'm going to turn it over to you now, Kathy, and share with us.
For sure. And I will just preface again my talk by saying that some of the growing has occurred on the not traditional but the present day lands, territories of the Kwantlen First Nation, and another part of it down in Richmond on the lands of the Musqueam First Nation. So let's share away here somewhere there. See if that goes. Make that smaller. There we go. Make you guys smaller so I can see what I'm doing. Right. So anyway, this is a repeat because we didn't think to record it back in November. So, but in the meanwhile, actually, it's kind of interesting. It has expanded a little bit because, as some people know, and some people in some of my students and former students that are present in the room tonight know that the history is always interesting. Now let's see if we can get it going. But just to kind of kick things off, because it's always so fascinating to sort of find these things. And when you go poking around in like history journals and whatnot, you find new information. And this was last fall, an issue came out in the journal Antiquity saying that that they have discovered textiles older than linen. And of course, we all thought that, you know, linen, whether it was in Egypt or in Turkey or whatever, was, you know, the stuff that they shroud wrap the, you know, pharaohs in and mummified them and all that kind of stuff. But since then, up in Turkey, they've found a site where they found textiles made out of the fiber from oak trees. And that they actually had figured out at that time, so 8,700 to 8,500 years old, like 3,000 years further back in time, using tree fiber as opposed to perennial plants or annual plants, which is so interesting. And then just actually figured out how to twine and you know, make thread and braid into yarn and weave them into textiles. And anyway, it's just so fascinating to go down the rabbit holes, and that's one that just kind of caught my eye because you know, we know going through prehistoric Europe, Neanderthal people were actually making 3-ply cord again from tree fibers 52,000 to 41,000 years ago, using juniper, spruce, cedar, pine, bast, the inside stuff, as well as some of the, so those are coniferous plants, trees, and then lime or linden, oak, and willows. And I was thinking today, I sort of tucked this in here because I just thought, yeah, you know, and of course it stands to reason that that knowledge would have been carried with the people that kind of drifted across Europe and Asia and it came over to this side of the world and arrived here on the Northwest coast somewhere between 14 and 20,000 years ago. So they brought that knowledge with them, and all they had to do was find the plants, which of course in our incredibly beautiful forests as they were, the fiber was there. And so it would have been quite an exciting time, I imagine. And I've also been digging, as everybody knows, I go poking around looking for photographs in archives, and I found this one from 1911, pickers at work pulling flax in their lovely long skirts and such like. And that technique, you know, I mean, the thing that's beautiful about flax, growing flax and processing it is that the techniques have not really changed since the Egyptians. Really, it's this wonderful technology that has existed. And I know Jamie got really excited about this last fall. Lovely kids in the Doukhobor kids up in Grand Forks from 1918, and quite a lovely harvest going on there. And I got kind of interested in these lovely shirts, smock shirts that they're wearing as well. So there's a tradition here in BC that, you know, goes back to at least that time in and around World War I. And over in Ontario in World War I, of course, with all of the, you know, young able-bodied men, and especially farmers off over in Europe, overseas, fighting the good fight. This is what the workforce reality was when they started to do some test farming of flax for fiber by the Ontario government. There was a farm, I think it's like off Yonge Street, and it's just like, yeah, where, you know, because that's like a very busy street now. But anyway, that's, so they were, but what I was looking at was the date. So the photo was taken 7th of September, 1918, which to me is kind of a late harvest. So it must have been a very late sowing to be pulling it at that time. But anyway, there it is, the old guy and a boy. That was all that was left to do the harvest. But anyway, and I got a few more photos like that that I'll throw in here. So back in 2017, after the club, where I just was curious because I like wearing linen, and I wanted to kind of figure out the whole process of what it takes to, you know, be able to put linen on your back, was, you know, looking at, and I got a little bit of a research grant to do this, was to kind of figure out, you know, what do we know about the history in terms of flax growing for fiber, for linen in south coastal BC. Then, you know, are there, knowing that we're dealing with climate change, you know, are there climate adaptive varieties that we could grow here successfully? At the time, you know, and still to a certain extent, there are 2 varieties that are kind of commercially out there that you can get access to. One of them, Maryland, and the other one, Avian, which is supposedly more drought tolerant, but in my experience, I don't see that at all. So I started with an inquiry over to Saskatoon, to Plant Gene Resources, which is the federal ag seed bank for everything. And the technician over there said, yeah, we can do this using my academic license to be able to get at it anyway. And they said, yes, that was good. What sort of effort? I wanted to figure out, like, how much effort is it going to take to get these small quantities of old seed varieties up to the kind of acreages that we would need to go into more local processing and spinning, and having yarn available for weaving and cottage industry, and fabric on the bolt for exciting things in interior design or clothing or whatever. It's a long process. And then, of course, the other one in terms of agriculture is this idea of, you know, whether flax could become another crop, organic flax as an early season rotation crop. For small organic farms alongside perennial indigenous fiber plants like nettle and dogbane, and then I guess around 2019 I added another sort of thought to that, which is what actually is the proper rotation, because there are some people growing flax year in, year out on the same chunk of land, and that's obviously not the way it's been grown traditionally in places where it's actually an indigenous plant. And so, sort of trying to retrieve that and figure out whether there's potential there. So those are some of the questions I started out with, and then, off we go again down the next rabbit hole, which is like, what is the history? And then finding out indeed that World War II triggered the federal government to ask the BC government to get on with it, because of course what was happening was that the fishing industry was vital to the war effort. People had to eat, they had to can fish to send to England and to the troops and all that kind of stuff. So we needed linen cordage for fishnets. That was the kicker. And then what happened was Ireland, which was center of the universe at that time for a lot of flax growing, lost their seed supply because Belgium was invaded. And so then Ireland said, could Canada grow seed and send it back to us so that we can have the seed to grow more fiber flax for hemp or for linen or whatever, flax rope, linen rope and whatnot. And so there was a committee that was assembled that kind of looked into all this and figured out what would be needed, and what kind of labor for thread, twine, cloth, fishnets, etc. And then UBC agronomy, as it was at the time, got involved in 1940, and out at the AgCan Research Station in Agassiz, they trialed European varieties on about 80 acres of land. And what they concluded at the end of that trial in 1940 was that, we could do it. We could produce as fine a quality flax to linen and can do all those things, but most importantly, we can keep the fishing industry alive. And so it sort of goes there. And then in 1940, because there was a prof at UBC getting students involved in doing all those flax trials out in Agassiz, there were a couple of ag students, Jim Campbell and Lorraine, who then became Lorraine Campbell. The Campbell farm down on Saturna Island became ground zero for student experiments to play around, and they grew 2 acres back in 1940 on Saturna Island on the west side there. The farm is still there. What they noted at the end of it is fine to grow everything, but if you're going to actually do something with it locally to make actually some kind of twine, rope, etc., is that you need equipment to process, and that kind of triggered some more stuff. And then of course you go down the rabbit hole again, looking for information, and the UBC, which is the student newspaper at UBC, reported all this stuff and hyped it up as these students doing it, and how exciting it was to make fish nets and all that. And yes, the impossibility of replacing nets in the future unless an effective substitute for Belgian flax could be found. Very exciting. So 1941, things really kicked off in the Fraser Valley. They got seed and they were able to sow 500 acres of Stormont gossamer, which is a variety that we were growing over the past few years. And what they concluded at the end, that's a lot of acreage, and was that, that the product grown in BC is second to none. I'll say, I will preface that with the product grown in South Coastal BC is second to none, and suggest that it can be used in the higher price trade. And then they started to kind of try and get the women's institutes involved in growing more flaxseed, mostly to feed livestock and for flax oil and stuff. So there's kind of a split there that was going on, but they realized that they needed both, and tried to talk the women's institutes into doing something about it. If you go into 1941, and I always find it useful to go into the annual reports of the Department of Agriculture, because it always makes you feel better about, successes or not such successful attempts. Heavy rains interfered seriously with the harvesting of 100 acres, which was cropped experimentally. But, 32,368 pounds of seed harvested, and that's where I just start drooling. They sent, there was a flax mill in Ottawa at the Central Experiment Farm, and they just said it was fantastic fiber. And so the conclusion from 1941 was, let's get on with it and do this. And also that it this idea that it might not be long before it would be one of the crops that goes into rotation. 1942, 175 acres, and this is where the provincial government kind of said, if it's going to work, what Jim and Lorraine Campbell were saying in 1940 was we need to process. And so there was an interest-free loan that went out to BC cooperatives and to help kind of make that happen, particularly building a scutching plant. They were wanting to get a spinning mill going and to kind of stimulate more flax cooperatives so that it could become one of our major agricultural industries. Oh, how we wish. Anyway, the loans that the provincial government gave out said that there had to be a minimum of 1,000 acres of flax would be harvested in 1943, the following year. So they set up Fraser Valley Fiber Flax Co-op Association. They got $3,000 for pulling machines and a de-seeder, and off they went. And then what happened was that there was a local court. When you go reading these government reports, they don't mention names, and then you kind of go like, I wonder who that was. But anyway, there was a local cordage company promised to install spinning and other machinery as soon as a sufficient supply of scutched flax is available, and that if BC could get some hemp seed, the spinning machinery would be used to actually spin hemp as well. This is like 1942. And then I kind of thought, okay, let's find out who it is. Anyway, I did more digging, and it's the Canada Western Cordage Company. And this is one of their wartime ads in the Vancouver Sun, I think it was. Alongside, it's interesting, cordage and twine have endured the passage of time, but corsets have kind of gone the wayside. Maybe, thank goodness. But anyway, they were located down in Gastown, 18 to 20 Water Street. It's a historic place now, registered. And they only started up after World War I to make fishing lines and twines and all boat lines and all those things. And they were there from 1931 to 1971. And the factory, though, where they did all the processing was in Westminster. So a lovely building and all that. But what's interesting is you just like flip back to before World War II, the PNE, of course, used to have these marvelous displays of things. And I found this photo. It's so fascinating. Canada Western Cordage Company display of ropes and cords at the PNE in 1932. And, and of course, I don't know if you can see the thing, that my eye was drawn to this little image just below the word Western in the middle of the slide. And I thought, I'm just going to go into Photoshop and zoom in and see if I can read what the heck it says, because we all know what this looks like, everybody who's processed our flax. And there's Manila fiber, sisal, Java sisal, African sisal, New Zealand hemp, not flax, which is interesting, but I suspect it might be raw jute, and I can't read what it is. It's a combination of something over on the left-hand side, but yeah, it's kind of interesting that they had all these lovely displays up there. So by 1943, they got another $85,000 that went straight to the Flax Co-op. And what they did was use the money to get a scutching mill, redding tanks, all that kind of stuff going. And so they could actually get the fiber to the cordage spinning plant. So it was all the early processing stuff. And, weather was ups and downs. UBC, meanwhile, went off on a sort of tangent of growing flax, oil flax, specifically for high protein animal feed. And that was what was also going on up in the Peace River. And they were getting 12 bushels an acre. But of the stuff that they actually threshed for fiber, they ended up with a heck of a lot of seed, like 320,000 kilos of it. We can only dream of those numbers. And so off it went. The thing that I'm still trying to figure out is where the modern plant was constructed near White Rock to handle the redding and scutching processes. And I have to go down to the White Rock archives and really go digging to see if I can find any more information about that. But in any event, there were all sorts of things going on. They kind of, because it was a co-op, they purchased more pullers so that whoever was farming could just borrow a puller instead of a puller that pulls it out of the ground instead of hand pulling it. It was on a little cart kind of thing, and all that. And they kind of started moving to good time production. And 1944, 258,000 pounds, 1945, 128,800 pounds of seed. Unbelievable. yeah, and I found this image of somebody who came out, the BC Minister of Agriculture came to look at one of these, it's like, well, we loaned you all that money. What did you buy with it? And this is, it's hard to see what, because he of course has to be in the front of the picture, but you can kind of see this little machine here that gets pulled along behind the tractor to yank the flax out. In 1947, the Chilliwack Progress, which is a newspaper out that way, had a funny little article, but what was very useful was that they actually told us the names of the varieties that were being grown. Lyral Dominion out at the experimental farm in Agassiz was one, and they figured that was the most suitable one, but also Stormont Gossamer, Stormont Cirrus, Prince Crown, Norfolk Queen, Cascade, which is came out of Oregon. And what they figured out anyway was that the best one in terms of fiber flax was Lyral Dominion, which I thought was really interesting. And Lyral is just this name, it's just an acronym for the Linen Industry Research Association of Lambeg in Antrim, Northern Ireland. And if you go looking for that place now, it's just a suburb. It's covered in houses. It's completely gone. I found this other image, from Canada Western Cordage down on Water Street from 1950. So they were still messing around with not synthetic rope, but rope out of whatever plant fiber. And this is the kind of netting that they were making, which is quite lovely image, I think. I'm quite happy somebody took the time to snap the picture, because it gives you some idea of how big a net was being made. So anyway, moving along, 2017, getting involved in the Flax Growing Club, making the request to Plant Gene Resources. And then what they did was they sent us 100 seeds of 18 varieties to evaluate and do the seed increase. And of course, I was curious to see whether there were 100 seeds in each of the little teensy envelopes. So I counted them by hand, and of course 100 seeds. He was quite generous in what he sent, and it ranged anywhere from 148 to 300 seeds. And what was really nice was that we didn't ask specifically, but we got 8 of the 18 varieties that they sent to us were actually grown from that 1947 time period. So we have a kind of interesting sort of snapshot of the history of the plants and looking at where they came from and all that kind of stuff. So this is just the record that we keep, so that, and also just looking at the history of each of the varieties, where they came from and all that kind of stuff. Because it turns out that what we started with, we get some ideas. So this is where Anna, who's in the crowd tonight, not Anna H, but Anna W, is that we started out in 2018 with those teeny little quantities, and I'm thinking like, all right, 100 seeds, and 100 seeds, as some of you know, is kind of like a teaspoon or less, half a teaspoon maybe. They're very precious, every single one of them. So I made this decision that the safest place to grow them would be up on our roof and at the university above the library. And we set up 5-gallon containers with organic soil and sowed 18 varieties into them. And we held back 20 to 50 seeds just because we were not sure whether this was going to be a go or not. But we got emergence 7 days for all of them. It's pretty much standard. This is day 47. Things are growing along. Up there, day 76. We tied them all up so that they wouldn't blow over in the wind, because it can get really windy up on that roof. And we were hand watering as well. Anna was hand watering as well. There's Anna back in the good old days. And this is day 90. So it was 90 days to harvest up there. And you can see what, 20 to 50 seeds, maybe up to 100 seeds looks like. Not very much, because every seed is precious. We bundled them straight away, putting the flower, the seed heads down in the bag and tied them up so that we wouldn't lose anything on their way to processing. So when every seed counts, it's kind of important to keep a lookout for them. So summer 2018, 5 varieties that we grew in containers reached a meter or more in height, which is pretty good, I think. We also learned that, and there are a lot of people I know that have been kind of hobby growing on balconies and such like is that, you just have to keep an eye on the soil moisture and not overwater, not underwater, but just to be kind of carefully watering and monitoring the soil moisture because in containers, things dry out a lot faster than in the ground where they can keep pulling moisture up from much deeper. We got positive seed increase, which was very exciting. And so from the original 100 seeds, we got a lot more. There are a couple of varieties that were very low producers and some that produced a lot more seed and kind of led the seed increase list. And I'll show you that here. So we're keeping track. And Laurel Dominion, which is, if you remember, was the 1947 go-to one that they were going to monoculture as opposed to kind of mixing it up. We had a 778% increase, which was pretty darn good, I think. We started with 170 seeds and ended up with 1,492, all counted by hand. And Stormont Gossamer, or another one from Ireland, did very well as well, but most of them did really well. And then there are a few that just didn't do very well at all, and sadly. And then also in 2018, we had this spot down on the ground where I was doing red fight wheat, and then because we had lots of that Maryland flax, we sowed a whole pile of it down there, and it was quite nice for a while. And fall, winter 2018, I got to thinking, if you could just kind of mess around with the lighting, you could probably grow it in a poly house under cover. And so we thought we'd go ahead and do that, with the idea being that you could get 2 crops in 1 year when you're trying to get seed. That's kind of, the more you can get in a year, the better. And so we sowed September 24th. It actually took 150 days to get to harvest, where everything dried off and ripened up nicely and everything. So 90 days on the roof and 150 days in a polyhouse over the winter time, which was kind of interesting. What we found, of course, was the lighting failed, and that's the biggest thing that you need, of course, to encourage plant growth is to have some light. And so that was it. The temperature wasn't a problem because in a covered poly house, it was just sort of spring temperatures. But we needed the lighting to kind of set it up on timers so that it would just kind of mimic the spring, increasing day length hours and encourage the plants to get their height. So we end up with seeds, but not fiber out of it, which was good. 2019 wasn't all that great. Because there are 2 people besides Anna. There was another person in the room. She's not in on this now, but who was also, and I think that there was too much overwatering happened, and then people go off for holidays or long weekends or whatever, and then there was underwatering, and so there were some issues there that, it happens. It just happens. So we only ended up with 3 varieties that we got more seeds of. Compared to 2018, and even though there was a decrease in yield of the 15 varieties that didn't increase, we still end up with more seed than we started with in 2017, and enough to carry us through into 2020. And that's why you hold back. I cannot, especially when it's a heritage variety, you have to hold back and constantly be refreshing your the hold back with new seed every year. And anyway, but Sharon and I did get around to redding and processing the fiber from the 2018 roof trial, and then we kind of weeded down the list to a bunch of at least 10 varieties to continue on with. So we picked these ones, and this is very qualitative evaluation. I'll say we drank beer and felt the fiber, kind of. In our final evaluation, but Laurel Dominion is there, the French varieties, and it was just like very subjective. But I trust Sharon because she's the one who does the spinning, and she has the memory in her brain of the feel of what fantastic means as opposed to good. So we knew what we were going to get started with in 2020 up. And so, of course, 2020 is what I call the pandemic crop. And Anna Westhaver if I'd known you were going to be here tonight, Anna, I would have said, I would have acknowledged you there. But anyway, the trials, we talked Sustag into giving us some space on the Garden City farm, and because they reduced food production because of the pandemic and everybody got kicked off campus, and nobody knew at that time what was going to go on. There was space, and I said, could I have some space, please? And Anna was just finishing up a class, and she managed to sneak in some time to prep the row that we got to use. And so right when everything went online and everybody disappeared, I was there every week on my own. It was very solitary growing experience, but we sowed out on March 19th. So the 10 that we kind of selected out from the original 18 list, we dropped it down to 10, and then we threw in the commercial varieties as well to just try and get more of those guys. And what was really interesting about that, being in Richmond, just that one, it was so quiet without any airplanes flying overhead, taking off and landing at the airport. And also that at least once a week it rained. And I don't think I've ever had such a cooperative season as that season of the first part of the pandemic. So True Leaves by April 8th, 21 days from sowing. And then I went every Sunday, and Annie the farmer was there the rest of the week. So we never crossed paths for the 15 weeks that I was there. We just agreed that we would be physically distanced completely. And harvested July the 5th, 109 days from seeding, 88 days from the first true leaves. So that was an ideal order. And looking at this year, we're going to grow again. We didn't grow in 2021, but we're going to grow out there again this year. And it's like we've passed March 19th, long past March 19th, and we're not quite there with the weather. So that was a magical season that was going on there. And then the other thing that happened, because I was just getting, bored with it ever, I did these videos because it was kind of boring. Anyway, it goes on like that. April 8th, April 13th, True Leaves. I'll just give you a little slips out of this. Oh, I should go back. Oops, go back here. How do I do that? Previous. True Leaves. And there's like 18 of these suckers. But it was so interesting. So if you're wondering what flax looks like popping out of the ground, I went down lying on the ground with the video camera to see what was going on and what it did. And every week I went back to the very same spot and shot again. And I can probably speed it up, because really all it is watching the flax grow, which is what I call these things. Anyway. And then June 28th, just before harvest, we got to this point. Yeah, 102 days from sowing. Anyway, and what I did every week anyway was do these, so anyway, this is what you see. Here's our flax in the foreground here, and super tall plants. But it's very windy out there. That's one thing I did learn, super windy. The other thing that I was experimenting with was white lupin, Lupinus albus, lupini, which is like 40% protein. It's a nitrogen fixer. It's a snack food throughout the Mediterranean, to just see if that might be one of the ones that we actually use as in rotation, because there's some chatter right now in organic agriculture that maybe this is going to be the next thing. And it's like, well, I was already doing that a couple of years ago, and yeah, I think it would have pretty good promise if we can convince everybody to eat that instead of potato chips when they go to the bar. So anyway, that's what it looks like when it's there. But what I wanted to show you here is more of this, which is charting it every week, measuring in the heights of each of the varieties from one week to the next, and having a look just to see, you know, where we're at. What's always interesting is to see where some of them leveled off. 120 centimeters was the longest that we got, which was really quite magnificent. I will also tell you that in Saskatchewan, they did an experiment trying to sort of go like, yeah, golden flax for flax oil and, you know, bread baking and all that kind of stuff. Maybe we should try growing some of these flaxes to see if we can get fiber. And the technical report that came out for some of the exact same varieties that we're growing, they were really happy if they got 30 centimeters fiber out of the same varieties that we were getting a meter. So we want long fiber, and clearly Saskatchewan should stick to the oil flax because they're not that great at the fiber. But what's always interesting is you can see some of them leveled off really, really early. Other ones were still growing and right up to the very end, but mostly they were pretty much all on target for the beginning of July. 2020, well, I did the rippling in my kitchen on the floor, seed cleaning, measuring, weighing, all that kind of stuff, set up the home lab in the dining room. Down at Trillium, we used the old bathtub. There's nothing very high tech about this. And then of course, the breaking and the scutching and the hackling that went on down there as well with some of the other stuff, the Maryland and the avian in particular. And then we measured and weighed the fiber, the stricks, the toe, the bast, and tried to figure out. And then of course, that's where we did another little field test and made some conclusions, you know, and this is our happy day down there. Oh yeah, and then also, you know, we did some redding in the old green waste bin. That's useful for doing that kind of stuff too. Sharon has all these wonderful little tricks and techniques that are very low tech, but you can see some of this lovely fiber that was coming out of what we had grown in 2020, like amazing fiber. The other thing is that, you know, I learned was to not give up, because this one variety from Sweden did not do that well in the very first round of growing. And it's only because my colleague in Sustag has Swedish heritage that as a kind of acknowledgement of her presence. And she was actually over in Sweden learning more about her family's heritage with flax growing. I thought, well, I'll grow the Atlas variety just, you know, to kind of respect that. And as it turns out, it did incredibly well down there in Richmond. So I also think that, you know, there's a bit of advice here for people is to just think, you know, is that it may not be a variety that works for me, but it might work for you. The soils, the microclimates and all that can do different things to, you know, very localized growing conditions, and and that's why having as many varieties as we can to play with helps us kind of go like, maybe it would be different up in the Comox Valley or in the east side of the Fraser Valley, as opposed to here kind of more in the lower mainland area, or say Eastern Gulf Islands or Southern Gulf Islands, as opposed to Sandwich Peninsula. So there are things still, many things to learn. So anyway, 2020, we went from 8 varieties down to 5 that we kind of, you know, had a second evaluation of. And at least in Richmond on the Garden City Farm, this is what we learned. But as I said, other varieties may work better, different soils and microclimates. But anyway, 1 from France, 1 from Sweden, 2 from Ireland, and another 1 from France. And watching the French one grow during that 15 weeks kind of led me to start wondering about France. And so, yeah, and I could show you this. It's kind of like, this is what you do when you're stuck and you can't go to your lab. You set up shop in your living room, and what I'm going to be demonstrating right now is just measuring. We'll just stop it right there. we got things to do. But that I got to thinking about France and why this one variety was doing so exceptionally well, because it just really felt like the right variety there. I mean, so, and some of them, you know, we kind of looked at it and went, yeah, maybe they weren't the right ones for what we were doing now. But the Swedish one and the French one were kind of interesting. But we went anyway, just to give you some idea of how the seed increases are going here. So 2019, you know, we had so many seeds and 700, so say the Emeraude, the French one down at the bottom, 794 seeds was the total that we ended up with in 2019. And then going into 2020, we sowed 3 grams of that. There were 3.73 grams harvested. We sowed 3 grams of seeds, which is not very much. But coming out of 2020 growing, we ended up with 182 grams. So we had this marvelous increase going on there, where we went from 794 to almost, you know, 28,000 seeds in 1 year, which kind of gives me hope that we're actually going to get somewhere into where we need to be going with these things. And it's the same for many of them that we ended up looking at that. But we were also kind of interested in seeds per gram weight, because of course you want nice, plump, healthy seeds. So the more, when you weigh 100 seeds and figure out what the gram weight is and figure out then what the weight of an individual seed is, we know that our seeds are still plump and healthy, and that's what we want. We don't want the seeds losing weight, because that just means that they're less healthy. And we were super happy with it anyway. So what happened? What happened in 2019 is all erased and all is forgotten, because in 2020 we gained across the board for the varieties that we actually planted. And even Nike, which was this one that it showed promise, but you know, we only ended up with 44 seeds sowing in 2020, and only 10 plants actually germinated out of those 44 seeds. We had a few little issues with crows and things out there, but we ended up anyway with from 10 plants, we ended up with 4,702 seeds. So when you count each seed, it actually shows how much you can go. We're getting near the end here, because we do want to have a conversation. But anyway, in 2020, we ended up, and this is the thing, is that we have so far to go now to get to where we want, where we need hundreds of thousands of meters of thread to weave into fabric or whatever. You know, in 2020, we managed adding them all up. We didn't even get to a kilogram of seeds. So we know we've got a long ways to go yet. And for those of you that don't know, you need about 12 to 16 grams per square meter, or 50 to 65 kilos per acre. And so we got a long way to go, as I say. So we're just going to keep on going with that. So this year in Richmond, we're going to zero in on the ones that showed the most promise, as well as continuing on with Maryland and Avian, the commercial ones, to just keep trying to get more bulk seed out of that. And then, you know, we'll just carry on doing it until we get to the point. But the other part of it is that, you know, I'm on this mission to figure out whether anybody else is growing the ones that we like at this time commercially, that we could actually kind of get our hands on kilos of it. Because, you know, when you have kilos of seed, this is what you do. This is, what year is that? 1918, again, a late harvest, September 7th. This is a flax harvest at that Ontario farm off Yonge Street. And just look at the piles of flax straw that's coming off there. It's just unbelievable, you know. And here's another one, 1927, on the way to a mill. And this is somewhere in and around, I think, Kitchener-Waterloo, but that wagon load is just overloaded. And we live for the day when we're going to get that kind of bulk, because then we're in business. We've got lots to do there. So before we kind of open it up to conversation, and Sharon has ideas about this as well, but I kind of threw this together on the weekend, and it's just like, one of the things about doing the historical research is that we know that this has been successfully done before in BC when there was a need. And if ever there was a need now for local fabric and to support organic agriculture, it is now, this is what I said in November: we do not need a world war to start again. And it's just like, well, okay, we'll just skip along there. And then of course, climate change and all that means like looking towards the climate adaptive varieties that can help with local sustainable organic production. And that means finding drought tolerant, low moisture crops like flax, flax that can go in early when it's this kind of weather and come out before the summer drought happens. And then maybe there's something that goes in over the summer to hold the soil together with a fall sowing of something else. And we know that we have a terrific organic agriculture sector that's out there that for whatever reason, we need to actually get behind and support them for all of the ways that they can help support us. It all starts out on the fields. And so we can help each other by doing that, because there's such an interest in the fabric, but to get there, we have to have everybody kind of connected together. And then of course, the model that started things off in BC was a cooperative model. And I honestly think that that's where we ought to be going again, is in that direction. Not everybody needs to have all that equipment. We have to figure out how to share. And I know that, at a very small kind of backyard, hobby-based, home-based kind of level, there's a lot of interest and local knowledge and the desire to sort of see this kind of thing happening, whether it's, at any step of the way, from growing to processing to, spinning and weaving and producing marvelous material goods. So this year, this is my to-do list. We're going to grow from the top 5, Atlas, Emerald, Lyro Crown, Lyro Dominion, and Viking. We're going to start this process of looking for how we can find people to help grow a single variety for seed increase, so that we don't get cross-pollination. Some of the seed that came out of Plant Gene Resources, that some flax has white flowers, some has blue flowers. And sometimes when they emerge and start flowering, you're going, why is there a white flower in with the blue flowers of this variety? Which means that there was a bit of drift that was going on in Saskatoon. And so to maintain, genetic purity, we need to kind of isolate a bit more. Because the other thing I found, like being down at, plant level for 15 weeks, was everybody says, well, it's a self-pollinating plant. But in fact, there are bumblebees rolling around in that flax all the time. It's quite busy with bees, and that actually was a surprise, because I thought, well, who knew that was something that we now have to kind of pay attention to, which is why we're going to do this. The other thing I want to kind of throw out there is that I think that we're kind of at that point now where we're like, where do we go with this? And now that the pandemic is kind of sliding into, a manageable thing in terms of get-togethers, is looking ahead to the fall or early in the winter of 2023 to pull as many people together, find some funding to do that, to bring everybody to the room together. So whether it's our, interior and fashion design people on the Richmond campus, but growers, processors, makers, everybody who is interested in it, to talk about is this feasible or not, and then to get on with getting funding to go to the next step, which is putting together a case for making it happen, and how would it happen, and all that. And then the last one is just which kind of has disappeared off my radar because of the pandemic, which was during this whole exploration of that French variety and thinking, like, where is this stuff? Where are they growing it in France? And then started looking at discovering that it's Normandy, and Normandy is over here, of course, not too far from there, right on in coastal France. Is the one part of France where they don't grow grapes. It's apple trees and cider country and flax. And better flax than over here in Belgium. But what's interesting from what I've been able to figure out is that it's co-ops that are doing it all, and I'm really curious to find out how they're doing it and how they're actually organizing from the farms to the processors to the producers of fine quality linen. So and every year they have a festival, a linen festival, where you can ride your bike around the countryside looking at all the farms and stop and look at stuff, and that would be a lot of fun to do. So I'm going to stop sharing, and Sharon is going to pop up somewhere.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kathy. I'm going to ask you a few questions and have a few things to follow up with. And if people want to post questions in the chat, I'll read those out to Kathy, and we'll just do a few questions that way to be kind of as time efficient as possible before I turn off the recording and go forward. I'm wondering if you were tracking weather at all in terms of those years and making weather notes for kind of what the highs and the lows and dry versus wet, so that when people are in different regions, they might be able to say traditionally or typically, if there is any typical anymore on weather, they are more like 2019 was in Vancouver or 2018 in Vancouver. Is that anything that
yeah, I think it's something that we have to look at, and because now I'm really curious, because they've just had the first heat wave over in like Britain and northern France.
Yeah.
Where they've already gone through a week. It's now back to crap weather, right? But they had a little bump. I don't know when they were sowing there, but that was kind of, that's an odd one to where we're at. But looking at, because I was looking at the weather records for, I don't know, Dieppe or somewhere like that, and it actually mimicked, like they were almost identical. Our temperature would be the same as what was going on in Normandy through that whole summer of 2020. And I'm going like, okay, you know, but it's going to mean going into a lot of the historical weather records to just kind of see it. And of course, going forward, I mean, like this is such an odd spring in a way.
Yeah, and that's where it becomes kind of interesting to just even think back on, as you said, the varieties that we were ready to dismiss out of hand from 2018, and then they actually did incredibly well the next year. We're like, wait a minute, we weren't even going to grow this variety.
And it's a soil as well, you know.
And do we have any idea what, like the Fraser Valley Flax Cooperative Association, is there any record on when they disbanded, or?
I haven't got there yet, and that's what I said. I have to go down to the archives in White Rock and then go digging through what they've got. I also have to go, the UBC prof that was doing the stuff for Ag Can out in Agassiz left his box of files, and they're stuffed somewhere in UBC archives. And because all that was like shut down, right, you know, and not accessible, but now that things are opening up again, it's just like, it's on my to-do list.
Pick it up again.
Now I'm really curious, you know.
Yeah, so I was watching, I want to give a shout out, first of all, before I go any further, to the Victoria to Linen flax growers, because they were who got us started back in 2014, as well as Pat Davidson on Salt Spring, who opened up her studio and her garden to me back that same summer. And also Taproot Farms in Nova Scotia, who's done such incredible work, Patricia Bishop, on figuring out smaller scale equipment. It's still super expensive, but being able to sort of look at how Nova Scotia can be revitalizing their local textile cottage industry. So, you know, it's interesting to see those other models that are out there and what starts to look possible. I know Jenny Green from in Nova Scotia at Halifax has started a van project, which is right near and dear to your heart, Kathy, of having like a mobile processing van, that kind of sense of having equipment that could travel from community to community. So I think I'm going to turn off the recording now. Thank you so much, Kathy. That was just really fantastic to hear yet again, and knowing that we have it recorded now, because there's things I forgot and there's slides I need to go back and look at closer. So, thank you again.
I could always share the PowerPoint too,